Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard. Thunder Force 3 for the Sega Genesis is my favorite shooter or shmup for the entire system. In fact, the game made its way really high up on my top 10 Genesis game list, which you can see right here or up there somewhere. Thunder Force 3 took a very strange path in that it started life as a Sega Genesis game, and then was modified slightly and released in arcades as Thunder Force AC. And then Thunder Force AC was modified even more and ported back to a home system, this time Super Nintendo, as Thunder Spirits. Thunder Force 3 was released for the megadrive in Japan in June of 1990. It came out just a few short months later in the US for the Genesis. This game ditched the overhead scrolling stages that were present in the first two games and went entirely side-scrolling. Sort of. You see, it wouldn't be fair to say that it's a side-scrolling game, because many of this game's 8 levels feature both vertical and diagonal scrolling, so it's really more accurate to call it a side-view shooter. Thunder Force 3 had a lot of cool effects when it was released back in the day, and it had an amazing soundtrack, one of the best for the entire system. And perhaps craziest of all is the fact that this amazing game was released on just a tiny little itsy-bitsy 4 megabit cartridge, or half of 1 megabyte. Now, Thunder Spirits was released for the Super Famicom in Japan in December of 1991, and it didn't find its way stateside until June of 1992. The game does have 8 levels, just like its Genesis counterpart, but it only shares 4 of them. Out of the remaining 4 levels, 3 of them are brand new, and one of them is a hodgepodge of 2 different levels from Thunder Force 2. Having come along so much later, this game was released on an 8 megabit or 1 megabyte cartridge, so it had twice the capacity of the Genesis original. So today I'm going to show you a complete game comparison of both of these titles so we can answer the question which one is really better once and for all. That's right, after this video, no more arguing. It's all been settled. Also, if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you something really cool you can do that I can almost guarantee you've never done with this game before. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Right off the bat, the Genesis original has a level select at the beginning, and you can choose to start on any of the game's first 4 levels. You cannot choose your starting level in the SNES game. The user interface with the currently selected weapon is at the top of the screen on the Genesis and the bottom on the Super Nintendo. The colors used are very different between the two versions, and the trees are significantly less detailed on the SNES than on Genesis. We've been listening to the Genesis version so far, and I think it's easily one of the best soundtracks ever produced for the system. And just, wow, does the SNES version have technical problems galore. There's slowdown pretty much any time you fire a weapon. It's really that bad, I'm not exaggerating. There's maybe 2 small places in the entire game when you can fire without slowdown. And this is going to cause a gigantic disparity in the length of the same levels between the 2 games. You'll definitely see that as we play on. Thunder Spirits on SNES has a much greater variety of background tiles, which seems to be where most of that extra storage space went. With regards to other visual changes, most of the weapons look a little different, several enemy sprites have been redesigned, and the score and top score float above the gameplay. Regarding gameplay changes, Thunder Spirits has more power-ups in the early levels, and they're in different places, and the first few bosses are considerably easier. The music on Super Nintendo is, well, a huge downgrade. The samples used give an ultra-simple, low-quality, generic sound. The songs are still good, but I don't think anyone can make a serious argument that the music sounds better on SNES for this game. Another thing worth pointing out is that the Genesis game uses the higher res mode on the Genesis, so in other words it runs at 320 by 224. Meanwhile on the Super Nintendo, it uses the low-res mode that most games for that system use, so it runs at 256 by 224. This gives much of the game a less detailed look, and enemies like bosses can appear larger and wider on the SNES because of this as well, where they reused some of the sprites from the Genesis version. When you defeat a boss on the Genesis version, it turns red and sinks to the bottom of the screen. On the Super Nintendo, the whole screen turns gray. On to level 2. The Genesis version, Thunder Force 3, uses this line-scrolling effect for the lava that was really famous back in the day. It blew away most magazine reviewers of the era and a whole lot of gamers. It's silky smooth and super fast on the Genesis. On SNES, yeah, the slowdown and frame drops really hurt the effect and make this level look exceptionally choppy. If you don't fire your weapons at all, it looks pretty smooth and is a lot faster, but when basically anything is happening on screen, it quickly reverts back to pretty terrible. And then I have to say, it's hard to believe that Thunder Spirits got released in this state. Yeah, it was kind of early-ish in the SNES's life, and we had seen drastic slowdown in games like Gradius 3 and Super R-Type as well, but I feel like it's a lot worse in this game than either of those. Those games at least run at full speed sometimes. This level is otherwise similar in both versions, but has fewer flame eruptions on SNES. And once again, we reach the end of the level on Genesis quite a bit sooner because of all the slowdown on the SNES version. So while we wait for the Super Nintendo to catch up, I'll take a moment here to point out that autofire is off by default on Thunder Spirits for some ungodly reason. You can hold select and start at the title screen to get to the options screen and then turn it on. The default button setup is also incredibly ridiculous and unintuitive, so I highly recommend that you change that while you're in there as well. As for the Super Nintendo music, once again, it sounds alright, but it's much better on Genesis. After going through that hot lava stage, we cool off by heading underwater for stage 3. If you look carefully at the background, you'll notice there's an extra layer of parallax on the Genesis. Well, faux parallax, really, but it has an extra layer regardless. They really changed up the enemy designs in this level on SNES. most of them look considerably different. The currents in this level that push your ship around are a lot stronger and more noticeable on the Genesis version. On the Super Nintendo, you barely move when you go through where the currents are. And there are a few oddities in my own playthrough of this level on Genesis that I need to point out. So first is, for a lot of the larger enemies, like the snail and the shell and the snake heads that come down that you see on the Super Nintendo, they're in the Genesis version too, but I killed most of them before they even really had a chance to spawn, so you didn't get a good look at them. Sorry about that. I was too busy concentrating on my gameplay, because I can usually finish this game without dying on Genesis. And yeah, I actually did that for this recording. But basically what you missed is that the large snails look way different on both versions. The big snaky things are a little more similar between the two. The last oddity about this particular playthrough was I actually experienced a glitch in the Genesis version that I have never seen before or since. The mid-boss in this level just didn't show up, and a few of the ancillary enemies that are near him were also missing. I've played this game probably hundreds of times on the Genesis, and this was literally the only time I've ever seen this happen. In the scheme of things, it's not really all that important, but I just wanted to let you know why you were seeing this huge, gaping, empty area with no enemies on the Genesis version. It's not normally like that, it just had a glitch. I've also got to mention that once again we are treated to a fantastic song in this level on the Genesis game. Technosoft's FM music wizardry is just on full display in their titles on the system. Once again, the slowdown is so severe on the Super Nintendo version that we reach the end of the level on Genesis in almost half the time it takes to reach the end on the Super Nintendo one. I hate to keep pointing the same thing out, but I've got to at least mention it so you understand why I keep pausing the Genesis game before the end of the level. Oh, and speaking about saying repetitive things, the SNES music is worse. Yeah, I gotta keep pointing that out too. I'll also take this opportunity to mention that I had to fight the upcoming boss of this level with a different weapon on the Genesis version because I managed to miss picking up the Sever weapon in the prior level. Oh well, I'll be picking it up in level 4 instead. So here's the boss, and he's pretty easy in both versions. Usually I have Sever here on Genesis and just mow him right down. On the Super Nintendo he's not exactly harder either, but it does take longer because the collision detection is way worse on most of the weapons on Super Nintendo. This will especially come into play later in stages where you have to blast bits of the foreground away to clear a path to go through. All I can say here is, ugh. This is my favorite level in the Genesis version, and it has my favorite song in the entire game. The level and the music were completely removed for the SNES version here. This level is also removed, by the way, in Thunder Force AC, the arcade release. The replacement level on Super Nintendo is, well, kind of a mess. The Genesis Original's 4th level is just nuts in the best possible way. It scrolls in just about every direction, pieces of the background fall or jump rapidly when you get close to them. There are portions where you have to tuck the ship into a little nook before scrolling reverses direction, and then we also have these big swinging rocks. You really have to pay attention to make it through this level without getting killed. Now on the Super Nintendo, the level we get is kind of similar in a way, in that you deal with a lot of background movement, but unlike level 4 on Genesis, the background isn't actively trying to kill you here. The biggest problem occurs about halfway through the level, but I'll point that out specifically shortly. On the Genesis, we also get this really nice waterfall effect in the latter portion of the level that has no equivalent on the Super Nintendo. I really don't know why this level was removed from the other versions of Thunder Force 3. I can really only guess, and my guess would be that they may have considered this level to be a little too hard because there's so much going on in it. But, I mean, it's not really any harder than most of the other levels as long as you pay attention. I think it's a big loss that it was removed from the other two versions of this game. Okay, so back to Thunder Spirits on SNES at this point. We now have some areas of the background that you can fly through, and some that you can't. The biggest problem is that it's not clear which places are safe to fly through, and which ones aren't. You basically have to equip a weapon that doesn't go through walls to see which background elements are solid and can kill you. And this is just bad game design. And the music? Yeah, it's not even close. The song that they use on the Genesis version is dramatically better. In fact, I highly suggest that you check it out either in the sound test or head over to listen to the OST on YouTube or something so you can hear it without any sound effects. It is awesome. If you weren't aware of how the power-ups work in this game, you always have your twin shot and your back shot. You can pick up upgraded versions of each. Sever, which is a thick laser, will replace the twin shot, and the Lancer, which is a bunch of big triangles, will replace the back shot. In addition to those, you can get Fire, which shoots missiles up and down, and also when you have a Claw, shoots out a short-range weapon both in front of and behind it. Then you can also get the Wave Beam, and then finally we have Hunter, which seeks your enemies out. When you die, you lose whatever weapon is currently equipped, at least in the normal difficulty mode. If you have Sever or Lancer equipped when you die, you just revert back to your starting version of whichever weapon you lost, so either the twin or the back shot. Back to the game at hand. The boss fights in this level are also completely different, and the boss on the Super Nintendo version is actually not present in any level on the Genesis version. The fifth level on Genesis takes place in this icy area with lots of diagonal and vertical scrolling. And again, we have a completely great song to listen to while making our way through this level. So here on Genesis, we've got a level that feels pretty unique compared to most of the others. It's very bright, it's filled with icy sound effects, and the frequently changing scrolling directions force you to stay on your toes here. It's not quite as demanding as the prior level, since it's got less going on in the foreground, so it almost feels like it was put in as a cooldown level after surviving a tough one. Did I say cooldown for an ice level? Sorry about that. The fifth level on the Super Nintendo combines levels 6 and 8 from Thunder Force 2 on Genesis, only it somehow manages to make both of them worse than they were in that game. This level just doesn't work at all in Thunder Spirits. It feels incredibly out of place. It also has a few sections with enemies that just magically appear in different places of the screen, and you basically have to know where they're going to pop into existence, or you will get hit. The music that plays on this level is a quite poor rendition of the Level 8 song from Genesis Thunder Force 2. here's some Genesis Thunder Force 2 to look at for comparison to that game. So something else they did in Thunder Spirits here was throw in some other Thunder Force 2 enemies that don't normally appear in either of these levels in Thunder Force 2. An example of this are the big missiles that sometimes come in from either the left or right of the screen and rush forward. So on both Thunder Force 2 and Thunder Spirits, you end up going through a high speed area, at the conclusion of which you enter the boss fight. So let's switch back to Thunder Force 3 now, since the boss is the same in both Thunder Force 3 and Thunder Spirits for this area. For level 6, we have a big ship to contend with in both versions of the game, but those ships are much different in each version. The exhaust the ship fires is way bigger on the Genesis version. But I will give the SNES version some props here for having a ship that looks much more intricately designed, at least where it comes to the basic appearance of it. We also get completely different music in both games for this level. While the Genesis version's music is better, once again, it's probably the weakest song in the Genesis version of Thunder Force 3. Still, even having said that, it's still good, it's just not quite great like all of the others. Now this level is much longer on the Super Nintendo, not because of slowdown this time, but because they added a big section after you take down the big ship. In the Genesis version, the ship is a nice, if simple, diversion before you head on to the game's final complete level. On Super Nintendo, the ship portion of the level is fine, but afterwards you head to this section where you're just bombarded with asteroids, some of which you can shoot and most of which you can't. And it's not even really all that much of a challenge because of the game's near constant slowdown. It's really more annoying than anything else. And then we get to another unique boss fight that wasn't part of Thunder Force 3. I mean, it's kind of okay, I guess. There's nothing extraordinarily bad about it, but I still feel like this whole area after the big ship is just totally unnecessary. Alright, for level 7, finally we have a level that we can compare directly again. Hooray! And really, aside from the slowdown and worse music on the Super Nintendo, this level is very similar in both versions. This is also probably the most interesting level in the whole game, and I'm glad they wisely decided to keep it in the SNES release. If you look at the backgrounds on the Super Nintendo, you can tell the tiles look wider on that one, which is once again due to that system's lower resolution. The animated tiles are similar in both, but the tile animation is a little faster on the Genesis version. So once again we have a level that's filled with loads of diagonal scrolling, and this level also can really fill the screen with enemies. I was almost a bit surprised that the Super Nintendo version is actually able to keep up as well as it does, even though it does fall pretty far behind. And then we'll have several sections here where we've got a mesh in the foreground that you have to shoot through. On the Genesis, this is really easy if you have the Sever beam. If you don't have it, it's pretty easy using the regular twin shot also, even though it takes longer to shoot the tiles out. Now on the Super Nintendo, shooting through the mesh in the foreground can be kind of a nightmare, because the collision detection just doesn't work right on the Sever Beam and several of the other weapons. Stuff that you just instantly wipe out with the Sever Beam on the Genesis can become a patchwork of missed tiles due to the bad collision detection on the Super Nintendo release, so it can be hard to hit some of the pieces that were missed the first time around as well. And yeah, even though I said this level keeps up surprisingly well, which is true, the slowdown does still cause it to last considerably longer on Super Nintendo than it does on Genesis. So let's talk about something kinda wacky during this little pause. Why did Toshiba EMI, who did this version of the game, feel the need to add the stage number to the user interface? It's so extraneous and such a waste of space. Personally, I really wish they would have moved the score down to the bottom portion where the UI is, and just gotten it off the screen. It's kind of in the way in the Super Nintendo version. Something else I'll complain about with the Super Nintendo version here is that the sound effects are just awful in a lot of places. I hate them. They're super annoying. I mean, the twin shot sound is cringe-inducing, and a lot of the explosions sound like balloons popping. And there's really no excuse for that on this system. They could have sounded much, much better. And as we listen to the Super Nintendo version's music here, we can tell it's nowhere near as good or as crisp as the Genesis original. I don't know why they used such a bad sample set for this game. It really should have sounded way better than it does. Alright, boss time. And in perhaps something that won't shock you to learn, we get tons of slowdown and flicker on the Super Nintendo port. We have a little bit of flicker on Genesis, but hardly any. It's just a tiny little bit. Alright, here we are in level 8, the final level in both versions of the game. In both versions, it's pretty inconsequential. On the Genesis, we just have a mini-boss that attacks us pretty much right away, followed almost immediately by the final boss. If you're powered up and have good weapons, it's pretty easy. On the Super Nintendo, they decided to follow the basic formula by not giving you a whole lot to contend with, but they did add some minor enemies and some foreground obstacles in this level. And really, with the appearance of this level, it looks almost like it belongs more in a Gradius game than a Thunder Force game. The most major obstacle you have to deal with in the Super Nintendo version here is this bit of scenery that you have to sort of snake your way around so you don't get caught behind it and die. Now, we also have two bosses in this version of the game, but strangely enough, they're both completely different than the Genesis original. So you saw in the Genesis we had sort of a big ship with lots of different types of fire to deal with. In the Super Nintendo version, the first boss is this giant snaky thing that you have to sort of shoot in the middle to kill. And as we approach the final boss, you will see, just as I mentioned a moment ago, that they are completely different in both versions. The boss in the SNES version also looks like something out of a Gradius game. They're both really easy if you're powered up. And hey, that's the end of Thunder Force 3. Time to see the endings and the credits. Now, I did make one edit here that doesn't affect gameplay or anything. After you beat the final boss on the Genesis version, it counts down your bonuses and some points very, very slowly. So I just cut that out to allow us to more directly compare the endings in both versions. This little scaling sequence at the end looks a bit nicer on SNES, thanks to its hardware scaling capabilities. Now here's the ridiculous ending diatribe present in most Thunder Force games. The ending text on the Super Nintendo version is mercifully short, and I appreciate that they shortened it. On the Genesis, it's much longer and much preachier. If you haven't beaten a lot of Thunder Force games, a lot of them like to have this big story at the end about how terrible humans are and how much we just love war and killing things. So yeah, Technosoft, thanks for that important reminder at the end of a shooter where we literally just killed hundreds of things during the course of the game. I really have to wonder, did anyone read this ending and decide to change how they live their life after it because of how inspiring it was and how thought-provoking it was? I mean, the game said, "Human beings, think about what you have done." Also, there are more stars and they look better on Genesis. Here's the lovely docking sequence in both versions. Lovely. On the Super Nintendo, we get a couple of quick pictures and we're done. Also, said pictures look like they were drawn by the cheapest possible artist they could hire. On Genesis, we get a couple of different pictures. They're of noticeably higher quality. We also get another new song for the credits. It's nice and has a really cool pipe organ part towards the end. So to finish up while the credits go on here, which version is better? I think it's very clear from comparing them directly that the Genesis version is dramatically better than the Super Nintendo version. In fact, I don't even recommend anyone play the Super Nintendo version unless they just want to compare it to see how much worse it is than the Genesis one. I mean, I can keep the summary here really simple. Every single thing about the Genesis game is better than the Super Nintendo game, except for maybe the tiny little scaling sequence at the end, and maybe a little bit of the design of the big ship in level 6. And neither of those things is anywhere near close enough to put the Super Nintendo version on top. So there it is, it's settled. Thunder Force 3 on Genesis is clearly the superior version of the game. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I know that was kind of a long one.
That's what she said. Don't you dare.
Alright, so the cool thing I said I'd tell you about at the end, here it comes, and bear with me. When I was about 14 or so, I bought a 3D Transformers comic that came with the cheap cardboard cellophane red and blue glasses. If you're around my age, you've probably seen these things a million times. Maybe not so much if you're younger. So the 3D in the comic really wasn't very good at all, and it was a huge disappointment. But I thought, I wonder if there's anything else I can do with these 3D glasses. And I tried a few other things, one of which was using them to play video games. And, I mean, it looked really, really shockingly great seeing some of these Genesis games wearing these 3D glasses on just a regular old CRT monitor. I mean, Thunder Force 3 in particular, the backgrounds looked like they had a lot of depth and stretched way back into the monitor, sort of like a really good side-scrolling 3DS game, you know, that used the 3D to great effect. And I want to stress, you don't need anything special other than the glasses. So just any regular old monitor, CRT, flat screen, whatever, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. And the effect is a lot more pronounced in some games than others, but there are a lot of games that look really good. It seems like most that look best are ones that use similar colors in the foreground and background. For some reason, it just helps them really separate when they're scrolling at different speeds, you know, with a good parallax effect. So hey, grab yourself a pair of 3D glasses and take a look at some old 16-bit games with parallax backgrounds. I think you'll be really surprised at the results. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. You know the drill here. Like, subscribe, and share the video if you want to help my tiny little channel grow. What's your favorite version of Thunder Force 3? Do you prefer the Genesis version, the arcade release, or, for some reason, the Super Nintendo one? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.